cambiar vidas,
change lives,
change organizations,
change
दुनिया में
organizations,
बदलाव.
Change the world.
My name's Jeff Ball, and I'm here at Stanford at a center dealing with energy called the Steyer-Taylor Center for Energy Policy and Finance. And I have a question for Jeff Heller. It was a fascinating discussion of a lot of things, but particularly of the energy efficient buildings that you're designing in San Francisco and Shanghai. And I wonder what the payback is on each of those buildings, and what your sense is of the difference, if there is any, in the appetite or the expectations for payback in a place like San Francisco versus a place like Shanghai.
Good question. Behind the slideshow, of course, is a ton of info, and I would have got thrown out of the room if I kept showing pictures. So I can tell you one really good example. Recently, we moved into the Transamerica building, where if anybody wants to come visit, please do. We're in the old restaurant space on the ground in the park, so it's quite cute. Recently, the Transamerica building became LEED Platinum, so it's top rating, and they did it through refitting and cogeneration and a whole series of other things. They save $600,000 a year on their energy bill, which is a considerable amount of money, and I'm sure their payback will be something on the order of 5 years or so. And then after that, it's just, continued savings.
Do you find any difference among clients in let's say, China versus the United States in terms of what payback they expect when they're making these capital investments in energy efficient buildings or infrastructure?
Well, in the U.S., in San Francisco, I mentioned that the building that I worked on, the 555 Mission building, they started the process to transform the building to LEED Gold while the building was under construction. Prior to that, they had kind of kept the idea in the back of their head, but they really didn't want to do it. They found that it was an essential element to marketing the building. People simply don't want to be in buildings that are not green anymore. In the commercial world, speaking about the U.S. for the moment, also the investors, the owners, investors of the project also realized that green buildings sell for more, and that over time, buildings that are not green are going to have further deterioration of their economic resale value. So that was a decision driver. In China, there's a little bit of that. We're doing a corporate headquarters for a clothing company called Canadillo in Guangzhou, and they're doing it out of a civic conscience, if you will. Others are doing it for marketing. But in China, the important piece there, which we don't have here, is that China has a coherent, sustainable policy. So from the top down to the local, people are told, we've got to be green, we're going to be green. So in China, that's been extremely helpful. But there is a mix, of it. And in the commercial world especially, and in the higher end residential world, green buildings are an important part of the value in the marketing.
Lady in the back.
Good afternoon. I'm Melanie Nutter with Department of the Environment in San Francisco. Excuse me. Wanted to make a comment as well as ask a question for David. Thank you, Jeffrey, for your presentation and talking about some of the building examples in San Francisco. I did just want to add that on the policy front, San Francisco does have something called the Existing Commercial Building Ordinance, which requires all commercial buildings that are 10,000 square feet and over to disclose their energy use. And we're hoping that that is a first step towards sharing information and having property owners and building managers have to share that with the city city, but once they disclose that information, we're hoping that that will help spur additional action and take additional steps towards achieving LEED and Energy Star. So that was my comment. For David, I'm just curious, how do you work with cities? How do some of these ideas get generated? Is it usually driven by those at MIT and you approach cities? Do cities approach you? So that's the first part of my question. My second question is there anything on the horizon that you haven't initiated yet in terms of a project that you're interested in, or certain areas that you're most interested in exploring with cities going forward?
So I'll start with the second question, just briefly. Is this? Okay. We are interested a lot in mobility and electric cars again, as kind of a recurrence of the theme from today. There's a lot of interest in looking at, from car companies actually, who want to basically deploy large electric fleets in certain cities. Sometimes they're kind of pre-planned cities in Asia, and some of them are existing cities in Europe. And so I'm not going to talk about which companies exactly, but they're really wondering from kind of an urban planning side, is there the way that they can leverage information to make this work as in the way that car sharing has worked so well in some places in the world. On the first question, which was how we work with cities and where do these ideas come from, it's like you said, it comes from anywhere. Sometimes somebody from the lab just working on something else comes up with an idea and we say run with it for a few months, really develop it out, try to simulate it and try to visualize it in some way, and then we can pitch it to cities that might be interested in it. Again, parking is an example of something that I think a lot of cities are trying to find long-term solutions for the problems of paying for parking, for finding spots and things like that. But more commonly, we actually just through various connections, we meet with leaders of cities, of public agencies, and we set up like a 1 year or a 3 year partnership. And they pay into a general fund in the lab that funds all different kinds of activities, and we'll run a class every year as well in the spring semester where students from MIT learn from us and then go to the city, look at the specific problems and develop 4 or 5 different projects that the city might want to continue on for the 2 years following. So yeah, it's very exploratory.
I should tell a funny San Francisco story since you're from San Francisco's Department of Energy. So about 8-9 years ago, Gavin Newsom and the city put out a planning policy, and the policy was if you're willing to make your building a green building, a LEED Gold building, we will put you at the head of the line of the planning queue. And San Francisco is notoriously long for planning approvals. It's like an eternity. But everybody got in line. Everybody. It wasn't like a few developers got in line. Everybody got in line. And so now every single application for a major project was that way. So the cities kind of stood back and said, They said, well, why don't we just make it mandatory? Forget the advantage of getting in line. And they did.
Okay. Anybody else? The lady here. Oh, okay. You want to?
I just have a question. I mean, we heard Professor Sweeney before talking about retrofitting building. Oh, interesting. I'm Frances SPRIE. I'm a visiting scholar postdoc at the Precourt Energy Efficiency Center, and I got my PhD from Chalmers University in Sweden. And we heard Professor Sweeney before talk about that, there's one thing with China, but if you look at Europe and the US, the majority of the buildings are already built. So my question is, are you working on anything when it comes to retrofitting existing buildings and making them more energy efficient?
Well, we do that kind of thing all the time. And like I mentioned, the Transamerica building, that's a retrofit. It's a fairly modern building, but it's a retrofit. Interestingly, I met with people from, I've been working with some people from MOHURD in China, Ministry of Housing and Urban Design. And there is a group that is looking at writing energy code language for policy for retrofitting in China, because there's a vast resource of buildings in China that exists, even with all its growth. So they want to tap into that, and certainly in the U.S. and in Europe, that should happen because of the large percentage of existing buildings.
Sir?
Hi. My name is Kevin Su. I work on energy planning and energy system management at Stanford. First question is for Mr. Heller. It was really exciting to see kind of the eco-city vision moving forward in China. My question was, what's the level of government that you cooperated with? Was it at the city level or the district level? And like, who did you really need to get on board to get these ideas passed? I actually heard that tax revenue is still something that's very important. So like, how did you, is that something you had to justify to these people that you're working with? And how easy or hard was it to persuade, you know, leaders, both government leaders and also business leaders, to really accept this particular vision?
We deal with mayors, party secretaries, regional party secretaries, and the heads of planning department, and then planning staff under them as we develop through these. The Guangzhou effort really came directly from the mayor, and the invite to participate in that. And that's all coming from policy from central government. So it's very coherent in China. It comes from the top down, and everybody's on board. Not so true in the U.S. In fact, sadly, I was at a fairly high-level conference down in L.A. about 3 months ago, and former Mayor Daley of Chicago was there, and he was giving a talk along with several other people, and he concluded his talk by saying, forget about the federal government. There's no help whatsoever, and it's got to all be city by city. So that's why we have the C40 and the R20 groups, because the federal government isn't helping. And certainly San Francisco has been self-driven on the matter for a long time.
So, kind of in a sense, in China, the political situation is a little different from a lot of places where perhaps the revenue is a lot tighter. Is that one of the reasons?
Yeah. No, I'm saying China has a very coherent policy, and it goes from top to bottom, and so everybody's on board. You don't have to sell it in China.
They actually their tax revenue is probably fairly healthy.
It has been until this year. It's probably less healthy.
Any other questions, Steve?
My name is Steven Su from ITRI, Taiwan. I actually have a question I wish all three of you could comment by turn. This session has a name by Integrating Systems Innovation, or System Innovation for Smart Green Cities. So I'm just curious, in your respective field or experience, which types of people are the system integrator? I'm not talking about from the engineering perspective, but I'm talking about when push comes to shove. Who owns the final decision in terms of what to compromise in the system design, etc.?
Well, I think what I said was I'm always looking for. I'm self-motivated about the integration. So, like Mr. Yang's talk about the cross-straits integration was very interesting about the idea of the sensing systems and the communication systems, and trying to bring that kind of thing in. And certainly the MIT talk is fascinating, because you can just watch that and say, oh, there's about 8,000 things I could do with that. The problem is that there aren't enough groups like this that get together and talk about it and then go somewhere with it. I spend my, entire time. Well, I work for a living. I do my job. But I mean, when I go to meetings like this, I spend my entire time at these meetings, kind of thinking about how do we get everybody not only talking to each other but actually working together. So it's a work in progress, I think.
I couldn't say anything from kind of a general perspective, but from our experiences at the lab, if the mayor gets voted out, that's usually the end of the project. So I think I'd point to him.
I think, according to my experience, for complex projects, usually government does the job. For smaller project, private entity can assume the responsibility by themselves.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I'm trying to get done in China is, and I think San Francisco would be a good place to try to get it done too, is to, in the contracts that are let, like, you know, if I'm asked to do an urban plan, we bring in transportation types and some others, and then we work with the planners in the city and so on. It would be great to be able to include in those proposals and contracts with the city all these other disciplines. And in fact, in the last 6 months, I've been trying to do more and more of that. But that part of it, still bringing people to the table. Really trying that in Dalian, because Dalian is very progressive in the eco-city philosophy and is driven by central government. But even with that, it's hard to get them to agree to bring in all these other disciplines that they really should.
Other questions?
I have a comment.
Harry.
Thank you. I have a comment. It's really more on the day than just this last session. Thinking about the role of government, we're in California. I think there's been hardly any, if any, mention of this state of Sacramento, government of the state of California. I mean, there's a, you know, it's there, and it certainly collects taxes and issues a lot of regulation. But I haven't heard much about that. It's okay. I just kind of note that. There was some talk about Washington, mainly in connection this morning with Dr. Perry with maybe about Department of Energy and its research, ARPA-E, and so on. But, you know, not much more than that. So it's really interesting. I mean, it's quite okay. We hear quite a lot about San Francisco. That's really very appropriate. But not everything can be done at the urban level. This week, week ago, I made the mistake of driving to Los Angeles. And I'm old enough now, I know I'm not going to do that again. For one thing, the highways are really badly maintained. For another, the traffic management, you get close to LA, was just horrible. And so there's an urban problem we have, which didn't really get addressed so far, at least in this meeting. So my point really has to do, I think, with a pretty significant government failure here in the structure, the responsibilities of various levels of government, not so much the city level. I think maybe the cities are doing better, but you know, the whole system, not so good in some ways.
Have any yeah, I know. Anybody have any theories about Harry's comments? No? Yes. You? Oh.
Can you tell us about? Okay, sure. I guess it's a little bit related to how government is responsive to the public needs, but you mentioned e-government, and can you tell us about the experience of e-government in Taiwan and what it means in a place like China as well?
Around 20 years ago, in the central government of Taiwan, the Minister of State launched a project to adopt ICT in public service. So Executive Yan's information department championed the project and integrate the data from different government agency, land data, military data. In Taiwan, citizen has the responsibility to serve in the army. So military information, land information, tax information, household information integrate into one system and to provide more efficient service to citizens. That's the e-government project, and which is very famous. So when we are negotiating cross-strait economic cooperation, a lot of cities in the mainland China, they want us to work on that area in order to improve the efficiency in mainland China city, since it is already tested successful experience.
You know, we're sitting here at a time of high tension between the United States and China on a number of fronts. And it seems to me that each of you represents cooperation between the two countries in your particular field. And I'm just curious whether you sense that the political tension affects what you do at all on a daily basis or not.
The political pressure in Taiwan is even higher than here in the States to discuss whether we should set up any economic cooperation programs with mainland China, and to what extent, with what kind of speed. The pressure is high, extremely high.
For me, not so much. I've been working in China coming on 9 years now, and you know, I don't experience it at all, and I work at fairly high government levels as well. So there's kind of like, you know, two sets of relations. One is the business relationship of people to people, U.S. and China, which is extremely strong. And I'm working in about 10 cities, so it's not just like I'm in one little spot. And then there's the government-to-government relations, and there are probably inevitable conflicts that happen. But on the whole, there's also an enormous amount of cooperation. So I would say, in general, it's fairly positive, and I think it's the people who have nothing to do with any relationship with China which probably create the most issue in that. And also comparatively, I think the relationship with China is quite positive relative to the current relationship with Russia, which is cooling off quite rapidly.
Yeah, from our research agenda side, we don't really have any issues that intersect with the political things that go on between the countries. And this is something that's not unique to China, but in general, we recruit talent from all over the world. And the difficulty of getting work visas for anybody, even just for a few months, is always like kind of slowing down innovation in the lab, I think. So.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when you're doing business in China, when you're dealing with higher level people, it's usually pretty reasonable. But when you try to go down to the nitty-gritties, then they can be as bureaucratic as anybody, or worse. Any other question or comments? Nope. Okay. Very good. How about another round of applause for our three speakers?
Cambiar vidas,
Change lives.
change organizations,
Change
दुनिया में बदलाव.
Change the world.